Yeah, okay. Well, as it says there, I'm Jan Lees, and this is Rex Haigh. Rex is a consultant psychiatrist in psychotherapy, and I'm a psychodynamic psychotherapist. And we're both group analysts, and we've both worked for some time in therapeutic communities. So Hélène asked us to come and talk about...
Could you speak louder, please?
Yeah, I'm going to talk over the projector. Okay. Hélène asked us to come here and talk about therapeutic communities, so that I guess you can tease out the similarities and differences between what we do in therapeutic communities and what you do in your therapeutic clubs. And having visited this afternoon, it's quite clear that there are a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences as well. Okay, Rex. Okay. So, although therapeutic communities in the United Kingdom can trace their theoretical and philosophical roots back several centuries and across countries, the British democratic therapeutic community model, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, theoretical and philosophical roots back several centuries and across countries. The British democratic therapeutic community model, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is considered to have developed in its current form during the Second World War, with the work at Northfield of Bion, Rickman, Bridger and Main, and Maxwell Jones at Mill Hill. Until recently, there were two models of therapeutic community operating in the UK. The British democratic therapeutic community model, and what was once known as the American model, also known as concept-based and hierarchical therapeutic communities, but now widely referred to as addiction therapeutic communities. In the past, these models were regarded as very distinct, but more recently they have become more similar. Democratic therapeutic communities are increasingly treating people with substance misuse issues and and forensic histories, and addiction TCs are increasingly treating people with mental health as well as substance misuse issues. Rex and I named these crossover therapeutic communities fusion TCs in a paper we wrote for the Therapeutic Community Journal in 2008, and the similarities and differences are discussed at length there, so if you want to see what they are, you can go to that paper. Okay, next slide. So there are 7 types of therapeutic community in the UK. There are mental health democratic therapeutic communities, which are part of the National Health Service. There are mental health democratic therapeutic communities which operate in the not-for-profit sector, and you'll hear a bit more about those later. And there are democratic therapeutic communities in the prison service. There are therapeutic communities for children and young people and residential schools, all run along modified democratic therapeutic community principles. There are therapeutic communities for people with learning disabilities. There are addiction therapeutic communities, and there are lifestyle therapeutic communities, which include intentional communities and faith communities and green care. As we've already mentioned, British democratic therapeutic communities have their roots in a number of fields. In the moral treatment ideas and practice of Pinel in France and Tuke at the retreat in York. And that's a picture of the old retreat. It doesn't look that different now, actually. Well, apart from the people in the front. In the progressive education field, with the work of Homer Lane, David Wills, and A.S. Neal at Summerhill School, and that's Summerhill. In the experiments in rehabilitating psychologically wounded soldiers in both World Wars, but particularly Bion, Rickman, Main, Bridge and Jones, and after the war with the founding of Henderson Hospital by Maxwell Jones, which became de facto the British democratic model TC model. And that's where the Henderson was originally. It then moved into a purpose-built building, which is now closed down. And the setting up of HMP Grendon, the only prison in the UK to have therapeutic communities and no other prison provisions. And the Castle Hospital, set up by Tom Main, and many others all over the UK. Excuse me. The British Democratic Therapeutic Community model was based on, amongst others, the following principles. It was to be an anti-medical model. Hierarchies were to be flattened, and it was to be as egalitarian as possible. No uniforms, no name tags, no deference to rank and status. Everything that happened in the therapeutic community was to be available for treatment and to become part of the treatment. This was Jones's living, learning experience in the here and now. There was to be a constant culture of inquiry, and there was to be shared decision-making based on the democratic principle of one person, one vote. Peers would be therapists for each other, and taking this therapist role was part of the treatment. In its purest form, there was to be no individual therapy, and all treatment would take place in large and small social and therapy groups. Rappaport, in his study of the Henderson Hospital, which is called The Community as Doctor, in 1960, suggested there were 4 themes to the principles and practice of the British Democratic Therapeutic Community. Permissiveness, which meant initially at least tolerating most behaviours from therapeutic community members in order to gain a picture of them and their difficulties. Reality confrontation, to then face these therapeutic community members with their behaviours, and particularly with the effects of those behaviours on others, and help them consider other ways of relating to others. Democratisation, allowing therapeutic community members to be actively involved in the day-to-day running of their therapeutic communities, and to take roles related to these tasks, which would increase in the level of responsibility over the therapeutic community members' time in treatment. And communalism, whereby all tasks, whether treatment, work or social, were shared amongst all therapeutic community members of staff and were done together, including cooking and eating and cleaning the loos, which when I was at the Henderson, the medical director took his turn to do. So therapeutic community fortunes in the UK have oscillated considerably over time. The 40s saw the beginnings of the British Democratic Therapeutic Community. The 50s saw the development of social psychiatry, which Max Jones argued was an extension into the community of therapeutic community ideas and practices. The 1960s saw the development of the anti-psychiatry movement, which fitted well with therapeutic community principles. And many therapeutic communities were set up in the 1960s and 1970s. However, by the 1980s, because of economic pressures and an emphasis on individualism rather than community and society, therapeutic communities began to be closed. The 1990s saw the closure of nearly all NHS residential democratic therapeutic communities, and there are now none left in the NHS. However, the 2000s noughties saw some growth in prison therapeutic communities and other therapeutic communities through the National Personality Disorder Programme. Although modified therapeutic communities, especially day therapeutic communities, have been around for some time, in the 2010s their potential has been developed and expanded.
Okay, thanks Jan. Jan has spoken about the roots of therapeutic communities, where they've come from in the UK, and now I'm going to tell you more about the current picture and a little bit about hopefully where they're going to and what's happening at the moment. So the changes Jan's spoken about, particularly the closure of residential TCs, have reduced to what some of us call a reduced dose of therapeutic community, particularly in our National Health Service. So the 5 days a week, the therapeutic communities, the day TCs, which have been around since the 1970s, they usually operate from 9 o'clock till 4 o'clock, Mondays to Fridays. And some British TCs have adapted and changed from the residential model to the day TC, including Francis Dixon Lodge, where Jan has worked many years. And that helped them to survive longer. But the pressure, the economic pressure on therapeutic communities has continued and continued. And they have struggled in these times of difficulty getting the funding. And the desire for quick and cheap fixes meant that many of the programmes were reduced to 3 days a week, which allowed staff 2 days to do other activities. I'll show you a timetable in a minute that demonstrates that. They would try to, there were different things set up to improve productivity and efficiency. But since then, since that time, largely as a result of the National Personality Disorder Programme, which I was part of as the clinical advisor for the country setting up new therapeutic communities for personality disorder, and that was between 2002 and 2011. Since then, 2 day units and one day mini TCs, so several different forms of less than 5 days have been set up, and some of them are just 1 day plus 1 group. So a very small dose of therapeutic communities is now becoming the norm. And the latest variant that we've set up in where I'm working at the moment in Slough in Berkshire is just 2 hours a week, and it's called we call it a micro TC. Because we argue that actually what's important is that network of relationships carried in somebody's head. And there are many other activities during the week that also happen, but without the staff president, that builds that network of relationships that form the therapeutic community. Here I've got a picture that shows I'll go and talk to it up at the screen because I think it'll make more sense. So this is what the British therapeutic community in the National Health Service looked like. Once they had stopped being residential, this is a typical programme from a community that works for 3 days a week. So here we have lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, yes, yes. And 9 heures and 4 après-midi. And this is and so what will happen on Monday, Wednesday and Friday will be similar in each community. So people will arrive and hang their coat up, have a chat, have a cup of tea or something in the morning, and then there will be 1 hour of community meeting. I think I put it here from 9:30 till 10:30, and these community meetings are very structured. There will be an agenda, and it will start with something like welcome everybody, any apologies for absence, is anybody missing, and then we work out where all the people are who aren't there. Hopefully there aren't many of them, and we know why they're not there, but that's in order to make sure the community feels safe and we know where everybody is who is a member of that community. And then there's other items on the agenda to cover the day's business and make sure everything happens in an orderly way. Then after each of the group meetings there's a staff meeting. It's actually about 15 minutes usually, so the staff all get together and share their different views on what's happening, so they get a really good understanding of the whole group process and how the other staff think about things, and therefore get a good shared understanding of people's problems and how they are displaying themselves in the community. Now the spot after, so this is coffee time as well, so after that in each of the days of the programme there is some sort of therapy group. Now the community I've worked on most recently with this structure had group analytic small groups. So the community is usually 18 people, and so there'd be 3 small groups of 6 people with a therapist each. So they would break into their small groups for that time. And then on the Wednesday they had a creative group, an action group, which was actually psychodrama. So the group were all together for an hour-and-a-half psychodrama session on the Wednesday morning. And then on Friday there's a sort of pattern to the week. So you open up things here. You get people associating to difficulties and discussing their weekend, discussing their life, and then you do something with it in the psychodrama, as it were. And then at the end of the week you try to in a way close it down and settle people before the weekend. So this is more personal skills, and it's more use dialectical behaviour therapy techniques and other types of therapy like that that are more directive and more helping people to cope, rather than the sort of analytic opening up type sessions in those. So each morning has a therapy group like that, and then again there'll be a staff meeting after each one, and then an important part of the day is community lunch, where the community is divided into different groups that take it in turns to feed everybody. So for 1 week it would be Group A, and then the next week it would be Group B, and Group A would do the washing up, and then another group would do the shopping and things. So the community was responsible for feeding everybody, including the staff, who were all also seen as members of the community. And then after lunch there'd be a more playful activity, and this is different things. I think on the Monday when I was here, we'd usually play games or go for a walk or go out and do some sport or something for an hour or so, and that was the Monday activity. The Wednesday activity was, this was all sorts of different things that might be administrative, might be reading group, we read plays sometimes, all sorts of different things that we would do together as a single group there. And on the Wednesday was more games groups, to have fun together, to be playful is a very important part of the therapy programme, because it's not all deep, intensive, difficult therapy, but there's lightness and laughter and fun as well as part of the programme. And then on Friday the members themselves would have a meeting without any staff, so they could sort out their business, their administrative business, so they knew how the community was all being organised, and get that into the diary and all the schedules and things for the next week. That happened on a Friday. And then at the end of the day there was a half an hour end of each of these days of community meeting, and the community meetings are very important in the afternoon because it's not residential. Everybody has to go home, and they can be quite emotionally disturbing these days, and so people could be in quite a difficult emotional state, so everybody would check out with each other to see how they were, and if anybody was in a sort of fragile state, if they were in a state of emotional difficulty, others would offer to sit with them for half an hour and have a cup of tea, or to walk home with them, or sometimes to arrange a phone call for later in the evening. And sometimes when things were very bad, people would actually go to each other's houses. At least 3 people had to go so that they could support each other, and then they'd see them through the night. So there were no staff on call, but the members were on call for each other. So the members would actually be responsible for understanding how somebody was feeling, going and seeing them, talking them down, seeing them through it, and then coming back in the morning when they would talk about it at the next community meeting. And that's a very powerful thing for members to do for each other, and they're actually better at it than staff would have been, because they really understand where people are coming from in that, into offering that sort of support. So that's what happens out of hours. I mean, people depart by 3:30 in this programme, and then there's a staff meeting at the end of the day to digest everything that's happened and understand it together. So that would be the format of these are the sorts of communities that we ran in the National Health Service, particularly for personality disorder, but that's a strange word, and I don't want to dwell on the diagnosis too much, because diagnosis isn't the most important thing to us really, it's how people present and how we can help them, and playing to their strengths. So that was Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and then on the Tuesday and Thursdays we would do other things. So for example, Tuesdays used to be devoted to doing assessments of new people wanting to come into the community, and we would involve members, current members, in that process, and we'd have a preparation group so people got a little bit of a taste of what the whole community was like for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and we do assessments on that day. So that would be the way into the community on the Tuesday, and then the way out of the community would be on Thursday. So people, before, perhaps 3 months before they leave, they would join the Thursday group, which is called a sort of recovery and rehabilitation phase. And then start talking about getting a job, or getting into some course or education, or volunteering, or whatever it was they could do to get a reasonable life afterwards. I mean, a trendy word for this is recovery nowadays, and the recovery movement is all about that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot more sort of depth in this programme, and that comes very much at the end, once people have had their therapy, that we start thinking about people getting a life that's worth living again, really. So that would be the pattern for somebody in one of these NHS therapeutic communities that Jan and I have both worked in. So I'll go back to the slides now and tell you the history of what else is happening. Yes, one of the important things is this hub and spoke model, and these came about as part of this national programme to set up new therapeutic communities, with its instruction and exhortation to be more creative with service and try and increase access to services, particularly in remote areas. So the hub TC is a central one, usually for 2 or 3 days a week in a large town or city. For example, the one I worked in mostly was in Reading, and then the next one that we set up was in Oxford, and Oxford has 3 hubs around it, which are called the spoke services, and they're mini TCs. The main TC is in the middle, and the towns have 1 day a week TCs in the smaller towns, so 1 day a week plus a therapy group on a different day. So still using therapeutic community methodology, still using the sort of timetable I showed you, but with much less time, so a lower dose, as I've said. And the same staff work in the hub and spokes, different TCs, and it helps make a therapy accessible over a wider area by doing this, including remote areas. So Oxfordshire has a population of not quite 500,000, about just over 500,000 actually, and so with 1 TC in the middle and 3 TCs, 3 mini TCs around it, you could provide a reasonable comprehensive service to quite a large area of the country, including the remote parts. So other things happened as well. That's one model we set up in the around Oxford and Reading. Another model happened in a different part of England, and these were different creative adaptations. And so there's itinerant and virtual TCs I'm going to mention here. Cumbria, which is very north of the country, next to Scotland, quite rural, only 1 or 2 towns of any size, they developed what they called an itinerant TC, and it met in a rugby club actually in a small town, one day a week for a community day, and for the rest of the week the community were in touch with each other as much as they liked through a specially designed website in an online moderated secure group. So it wasn't a public website, it wasn't like Facebook, it was a special group that they'd had set up so they could, you know, do their therapy with each other, as it were, to support each other in different ways online. And the staff would watch what was going on but wouldn't participate very much. They'd be moderators, they'd be moderating it, and senior members would also moderate it. But the idea was that people could use that virtual space to have an experience of being in a therapeutic community through being online. The one in Edinburgh is different again. This was set up by ex-service users, and this was a purely virtual TC, so they didn't meet for formal meetings at all, and they had agreed rules that they decided through email or online discussions, and they occasionally had social activities together where they'd meet in a park or a cafe in Edinburgh. And so I think that's a thing to watch out for as internet develops and young people are much more comfortable with existing so much more online than people of our age are, Jen, and things. So I think that's something that may happen in the therapeutic community field in future, and is happening indeed. I could give you more examples later if you want. Okay, so let's move on from the virtual one to training for therapeutic communities. This is something that we've been doing for a long time. Jan and I are on a team of about 10 people, which has been running since about 1978. We haven't been doing it since 78. We've been doing it since, I think we started them in 95. So 20 years we've been running these transient TCs that give staff the experience of what it's like being in a therapeutic community. And so we've done them for 20 years in the UK, and the last 15 years we've also been doing quite a lot with colleagues in Italy. So they're 3-day events where about 20 people come, and there's 3 or 4 staff. It's a beautiful country house in England. I don't think I've got a photo here. I've got some flyers though. Oh, is there a picture? Oh yes, hang on. Yeah, there we are. This is a beautiful old house, and it's got an organic farm next to it, lots of fields and animals, very tranquil, sort of idyllic sort of place in the English countryside, about 40 minutes from London, I suppose. And we give people this experience of what it's like to be a TC themselves. And the people who run it, they're all experienced TC staff. Most of them are group analysts. And it involves intensive group work, community meetings, much like the timetable I showed you, small therapy groups, cooking for each other group, so each small group takes it in turn to cook for the whole group, and that's a big responsibility, so that everybody is happily fed for the day's meal and things. And then lots of other groups that are created spontaneously at the time. Social groups, sports groups, going for a walk in the country groups, yoga, we've had head massage, we've had all sorts of things happen, dream workshops. I mean, all sorts of things happen spontaneously because people come along with the relevant skills, but it's entirely up to the group to decide what happens during that weekend, except for the community meetings and small groups, which are set by us, and the rest is designed by the group at the time. And so these are the training events that we run.
So if you want to really know what a therapeutic community is like, come to one of their workshops.
Yeah, I've got some leaflets about them here, so you're very welcome to come. You probably need to speak a bit of English to be able to understand it at least, but our Italian colleagues came without understanding an awful lot of English, so it is possible to come. And a lot of what happens is non-verbal and just being together, of course. So like any TC, the whole group is responsible for what happens in it, and that includes the food, the leisure time, the choice of small groups, how we can have crisis meetings in the middle of the night if necessary in order to sort out any unresolved issues that people are troubled by. And as well as, this all sounds quite heavy, and it is indeed a heavy, intensive experience, but it's also playful and good fun too. I think most people who come do enjoy them. We've done research on them, and we're doing more research on these things, and we're going to write them up because they're we think they're quite interesting, sort of almost laboratories of group work and how therapeutic communities work. Okay, I'll find the flyers in a minute, so I can give you, I'm sure I've got enough for all of you here. Here's one we did in Spoleto with a group of Italian people in 2006. We do 3 or 4 a year in the UK, and perhaps 2 in Italy usually at the moment, and occasionally elsewhere as well. So that's those ones, and now I'll move on to, this is even better. This is in Sicily, when we had two of the new therapeutic communities therapeutic communities that set up in Oxford and Nottingham. We decided to have staff induction events by having a living learning experience, like I've just described, on a boat in Sicily. So we were 4 days.
Character building.
4 days on a boat.
With cold water.
The toilets were awful. The water was cold. There were jellyfish everywhere, so we couldn't swim in the sea.
And the kitchen was about the size of this table.
Yes.
For 25 people.
But it was a great bonding experience for all the staff team to work together and understand the stresses and strains of working in a therapeutic community. We also did a lot of work on how to relate to each other in the new services that were being set up.
Having a community meeting in the middle of the sea, in the sunshine with the blue sky, was absolutely lovely.
Okay, let's move on a bit. So one of the things I've mentioned already, I'll say a little bit more about, is we also believe that other treatment environments being developed in Britain and I'm sure elsewhere, which aren't directly organised as TCs, but where the providers and staff have a TC in the head, and I'm sure the place we've been to this afternoon, the therapeutic clubs like that, and in England they particularly include what we call therapeutic environments, and so there's psychologically informed environments, and that's a programme that's being set up for homeless people, and it's using therapeutic community principles to make an environment that people understand is one in which they feel emotionally safe and feel they can talk to each other in different ways. And so that's the therapeutic community in the head for homeless people. There's another one called PIPES, P-I-P-E-S, which is psychologically informed planned environments, which is one that happens in prisons, and that's a programme that's going very strongly in England at the moment, where many prisons actually are having wings dedicated to them that are being turned into these things called psychologically informed planned environments. So the staff are trained in a way to interact, the prison warders, I don't know what else do we call them? The prison officers work with therapists in order to create an environment in the prison that is not hostile, that is relational, so people's existence as human beings is recognised in a prison, which isn't often the case. And I think what this shows is there's a great deal less violence, there's less incidents, there's less problem for the staff, and many things. And it's only 2 years into the programme, so it's certainly been well thought of so far. I'm sure proper results will be published before very long. But it's based on this therapeutic environments idea I've been talking about. Another one that's happening is therapeutic childcare, which children's homes where children are looked after. I don't know how things happen in France, but they can be very difficult environments, and there can be scandals and difficulties, and children can be very alienated from psychological health, as it were, by being brought up in a rather barren, loveless environment. And I think the therapeutic environments, which is now a programme that's recognised by the government to give a decent therapeutic experience for children in as they're being looked after by the state rather than looked after by their parents. So that's something that's happening quite strongly as well. And all of these are quality assured and recognised by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, where we have a set of standards and a process for ensuring that people are doing it to a good standard. Okay. Okay, so with these different modifications and new things that are happening with therapeutic community provision in Britain, I think probably others started thinking that Rappaport's themes, the ones that Jan mentioned, permissiveness, reality confrontation, communalism, and democratisation, were a bit old-fashioned, and they only defined one way of working in therapeutic communities, and we wanted some new theory that covered a wider range of therapeutic communities, and also gave something of the analytics perhaps not the right word, but the personal experience of being in a community for people. So what I pulled together in a paper a few years ago now was the developmental experience needed by TC members, but in fact needed by us all, based on various psychological theories, that we so that we have a healthy, what was called a primary emotional development, and that's required for good mental health. And if somebody's abused or neglected or traumatised or has severe losses as a child, that will be disrupted in a way that they may well have severe emotional consequences to their mental health later on. And so that's what we do in a therapeutic community, is recreate that emotional development in a much more healthy way. Now let me just take you through the 5 elements of it in the next page here. I mean, these are all common psychological ideas, so there's nothing new in here. It's just putting them together in this way that some of us find useful in therapeutic communities. And this is what I call the quintescence of a therapeutic community. There's sort of 5 universal qualities that everybody needs in order to develop healthily, emotionally. And it's also trying to distill the common factor of what it is in the environment, in the ether, in the atmosphere of a therapeutic community. And so attachment is about encouraging a sense of belonging, really, and helping to reconstruct a secure base for themselves, so that can be used to bring about changes in relationships and patterns of behaviour. So using attachment theory and the disturbed forms of attachment. And then it goes on to something a little bit less primitive, less early than attachment, which is the containment, which is really the be-on idea of creating a culture of safety and holding and boundary keeping, where difficult experiences and feelings can be tolerated and processed. Very much the sort of the screaming infant and the maternal response to it. It's those Kleinian and beyond ideas, I think, that's in this concept of containment, which I think is a very important pre-verbal, unconscious process that we have all gone through in our own developments, and all infants do, and if it goes badly, it may well be helped by having another go at it later on. Now where am I up to here? And then communication is what we would also define as a culture of openness. So it's very possible to talk about and communicate anything of experience. That's got something of the permissiveness and the reality confrontation of rapports, because you could do something and talk about it and everything's open. It's not as if things are hidden away or secretive. So experiences and feelings are talked about and symbolised and understood. And in the process of building, that builds relationships as well. And then the 4th one, inclusion or involvement, and that's a culture really of participation and citizenship, and interdependence and intersubjectivity. And this is very much about the living learning experience again, where everything that happens in the therapeutic community can be used for therapeutic effect. And the other thing I call it is learning to find your place amongst others, how you fit into your social and experiential world, as it were, and find a place that's in a healthy equilibrium of some sort. The final stage, which is the one moving towards adulthood, as it were, is what I call personal agency, which is very much about the culture being one that empowers people, and particularly in the way they relate to others, where the patient is actually their own expert and is a therapist for their peers, as well as being able to take positions of authority and responsibility. And that's very explicit in a TC, the way old members, the ones who've been there for many months, are really so experienced they can tell the new ones what to do, and people can learn a great deal from them and learn better in a way than they could from staff, because it's people who have been through it themselves. And then they make decisions for themselves, and really that's finding the sort of self, the seat of the self, which is where action comes from, where one's will is imposed upon the world, as it were, and one feels a solid sense of yourself, which is so lacking in many of the people we have in the treatment program. Anyway, enough of that. That's the quintessence, and that's a sort of theoretical sequence that quite a lot of TCs use, both in designing their programs so that they attempt to meet these things, and talking about the culture and understanding what people's experience is in therapeutic communities. Another new development in therapeutic communities was in the 2000s, was the development of the Community of Communities. Now this is a project for quality assurance and quality improvement in therapeutic communities, and this is run by the Royal College of Psychiatrists in London, and it provides a national peer review process And it's a peer review process that's not like an inspection, but it's more in keeping with the way TCs have a group of people that help each other. So standards for the process were democratically derived at the beginning through representative groups of staffs and service users coming together and deciding what is a TC, what needs to happen in a TC. And they've been regularly reviewed and modified over the last few years. I think the 7th edition was published earlier at the end of last year. So there's many iterations, and that's freely available on the web, on the Royal College of Psychiatrists website. Just look up Community of Communities, and it's early. It's quite high up in the Google results. So staff and TC members, they visit each other's TCs once a year. So each TC will get a visit once a year from somebody else to discuss how they're doing and how they meet the standards or not. And each TC will go and visit somebody else. So they get quite a lot of external contact and understand how other TCs are working. And they each have a report written that they can use to argue with their funders that they're doing a good service, or however else they want to use their review. And then there's once a year, about May time, there's an annual forum in London where all the different communities, usually have about 150 people, come together for a day event in London, including lots of service users, and there's all sorts of events and workshops going on. Sometimes there's songs and dances and other things too. So it's a very sort of lively sort of event there that we have. And that peer review process of people visiting each other has now been rolled out for all the quality improvement projects in the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So that methodology that comes from Therapeutic Communities has been used in other settings as part of the general work in the UK. Okay. So this is... now, can you spot Jan in this photo? Yes, there she is. And I'm just at the bottom of the stairs there. It's a few years ago, as you can probably see. This was in the... I didn't mean it like that. This was one of the early meetings of the Community of Communities, probably about, I don't know, 2005 or something, I expect. Okay, nearly through. Latest developments. Now, this is some sort of quirky things we're getting up to nowadays. The old asylums of the 19th and 20th century in Britain used to provide farm working and horticultural therapy as part of treatment programmes. And these elements of treatments largely disappeared as the large psychiatric hospitals and asylums in the country closed down. But in some ways they've been revived now as what we call green care. And green care is built around, is basing a relationship with nature and the earth and sustainability, and it involves horticulture and farming, as well as therapy with animals, equine therapy with horses, and the use of therapeutic spaces in nature. And this is something we've been trying to do, because many hospital environments and building environments are very impersonal. So one of the things we do is we run therapy in this yurt here, which is in an environment centre, how would I say, just close to Heathrow Airport. Actually, it's about 5 miles from Heathrow Airport, near London. And this idea of green care is being taken up by a few TCs. Many of them, it's been there a long time. Certainly TCs I visited in Australia and New Zealand, it's very much part of the community to keep animals, including chickens for eggs and pets and all sorts of animals, and that's seen as an important part of it, which I completely agree with. But in the UK, we're trying to say green care is a good thing, and it's a sort of antidote to the sort of industrialisation and commercialisation and corporate mentality of a lot of mental health nowadays. For example, this year a horticultural unit up in Cumbria, near the itinerant TC I told you about, right up in the north of the country, started a 1 day a week TC alongside a huge project where they grow and sell 10 acres of fruit and vegetables. So they many thousands of euros a year. They actually make money from the produce that the therapeutic community make as part of the therapeutic work. And our own green care project is called Growing Better Lives, and I've got some leaflets about that as well that I'll leave you, and it's based in this yurt, as I show. And I think, this is the conceptual framework was written about it about 4 years ago, and this is a European Union group, cost action some people probably know cost actions, to write a conceptual framework of what is green care. So to pull together the first experiences of people working in different countries across Europe and define what's going on. I think they're planning on a second cost action at the moment, and more research work on it to show that actually nature is an important part of it. And I think the other side of the nature is that sustainability, living on a planet that's sustainable and worth living on, is the other side that we do. So we're very eco-friendly in the way we work, and have a low carbon footprint, I hope, and things like that. So there we are. That's our place we work in yurt. And I think I've got one photo at the end. Oh yes, here we go. This is going into our yurt here. That's the door to our yurt. Then if we go right inside, there we are. That's the. This is where we have therapy groups inside the. Inside. It's a lovely space. It's very different, as I say, to a hospital or other setting, and quite therapeutic in a sense, just to be together in a space like that, and then doing things as well. And therapy groups, even more so, is a bonus on top of that.
Just a patient came in, didn't he? And said, he walked through the door and said, "I think I've landed on another planet." Yes,
and another one said, "Oh, I think this is heaven." So, anyway, this is myself and a few others in our group from Growing Better Lives getting an award. We got an award last November for being the Sustainability Project of the Year from, again, the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So we're quite chuffed with that. So anyway, with these developments, I think show you. Jan's been talking about where therapeutic communities have come from in the UK, and I'm talking a bit about where we hope they're going to, and some of the interesting things they're up to. It's a very small field, so we're not trying to be grand about it. We're saying, look, there's something here in mental health that's interesting, that's actually much more interesting than psychopharmacology and brain scans. Not that they're irrelevant, but it actually needs attention too, needs serious attention as well. And I think that is where we finish. So thank you very much.
I guess we were just saying it basically, certainly the recent developments illustrate the sort of creativity and adaptability of therapeutic communities in Britain at the moment.
Okay. This was made in 2007, and this was one of the new therapeutic communities that was part of the government's programme for setting up new services. This one's in Nottingham, where Jan comes from, and it was made by half a dozen service users with a film company who came in. 2 people from a film company came in, and in 2 days they made this film. You may spot me in it, but I was just pulled in at the last minute. I didn't encourage them to say anything. It's their own script, it's their own way of doing it. There's no spoken language in it. It's all sort of music and action. So let's see if this works. It works, but with a sound. I'll just leave it on the laptop now. There's a few jokes in here, visual jokes. See if you see them.
There you are. That's